Hello, welcome back to Once Upon a Page. Today we're going to talk a little bit about our publishing journeys, how we even got here to begin with. Even though it is a lot easier to get published now than it used to be, there are still a lot of hurdles to get over as you try to take this story that you think is amazing and wonderful and actually have other people believe that it is too. So, how did you guys first get published?
Well, I think in some ways it has gotten harder rather than easier, and in some ways it is easier with indie publishing. You don't have to find the publisher. You don't have to
It's almost
go
too
through all
easy.
those. Sometimes it is if you're not dedicated to getting it done right.
Right.
And there are a lot of indie published people out there that do it right.
Yes.
And I love them, and I'll read them cover to cover every time they put one out.
Right.
But there are still those that give indie publishing a not so great name.
Yes.
But now it's like if you want to be published with the big publishers and things like that, you've got to go through agents. You've got to be going to the conferences and things like that. And I understand the conferences show that you're dedicated to what you're doing.
Right.
And that's a great thing and everything. But in that respect, you don't have the authors being able to go straight to the publishers anymore and send in these unsolicited manuscripts. And that can make the journey a little longer than maybe it used to be if you can't self-publish.
Right.
I couldn't self-publish mine. You have to do it right. You have to have some funding to do it. So I knew when I went to put out Faith's Journey that I wanted to find a publisher for it. And partially because one, if it was on me, I couldn't afford to have a professionally put out book, and I didn't want anything less than that to get put on the market. And with it, I also kind of wanted that knowledge that I thought it was worth being put out there. Other friends and writing group people thought it was worth being put out there.
Right.
But did the industry think it was worth being put out there? And so that's why I went that direction with Faith's Journey.
Validation.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah, it is. It's good.
is.
It's good to be told by somebody that you're not necessarily friends with, oh, yeah, this is a really good book, you know, because, of course, my dad, who's my biggest fan, is always going to say, wow, that's a really good book. You always impress me with your talent, you know. And I appreciate that. I love it.
Right.
But sometimes you need to hear it from somebody you've never met.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how about you?
I always wanted to be traditionally published. It was just my dream growing up, and so that's what that was always on my mind. I knew that I probably could indie publish, but like Heather, I didn't have the funds to do that at the time, and it was intimidating to me for one thing.
Yes.
Because you got to have an excellent cover, you got to have editing. I mean, you can't skimp on any of those areas. And so I just knew that, especially starting out of the gate, with your first book, I was like, no, I don't really want to do it traditionally.
Yes.
And of course, I always had the hope that I would get with like a major publisher. Everybody does. I think one of the top big ones. But my story is actually kind of funny because my publisher walked into my store one day, and I owned a retail store. And she just come in, we started talking about books and writing, and I was like, oh, I'm an author, and she's like, oh, you are, and so we started talking, and she invited me to a writing meeting, and then shortly after that, my son got diagnosed with leukemia, and so we had to, of course, rush to St. Jude and all that, and I had to close my store, but in the middle of that journey, she invited me to the Ken 10 Writers Retreat, which you guys were talking about earlier, And so I was like, I don't know if I can come because, Gabe was, everything was up in the air. And she was like, try to come if you can. I said, okay. So I ended up going. And I booked a mentor meeting with her. And my book wasn't even all the way finished. And she read it and said, I want the whole thing. And I said, you do? Like, you know what I mean? I'm like, oh my gosh. And I'm sitting there going, okay. I didn't want to come out and be like, it's not finished. But I had to say, well, I'm almost done, And she was like, well, you have 2 months. And I was like, okay. So anyway, I sent it in and then got a contract. So the rest is kind of history there. But
Awesome.
yeah, that doesn't really happen very often. Doesn't just fall in your lap like that. But for me, it was good though because it pushed me to get serious, and I needed a push to get serious. Because it's something I've always loved to do, but I never quite finished writing a manuscript for one thing. But then I never really, I don't know, I needed someone else, like you were saying, that validation to say, this is good. I want you to send it to me. So for me.
So I don't think I even really knew that much about indie publishing when I got started. And so I was basically just, let's do this the old-fashioned way, I guess you could say. But I didn't research enough. And so when I sent my manuscript to the publisher that I was trying to get with, I didn't realize that it was the wrong genre. They were publishing they were publishing biblical fiction, and mine was Christian fiction.
Gotcha.
And there is a difference. Biblical is actually set in the times of the Bible or thereafter, just in within 100 years. And mine is contemporary. But God smiled on me anyway, because the woman who was the acquisitions editor at that time for that company read the book, and when she left their company, she contacted me and said, I want to publish your book.
Oh, awesome.
And so
nice.
she walked me through doing my first book, and then with the second one, it was more of I sent it to the right publisher that time. I did it the right way.
Research helps.
Research.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's basically how I did it. Yeah.
It is kind of different because a lot of times I know that authors talk about how, I got this file folder full of rejection slips before, and it sounds like you kind of stepped into yours. You kind of stepped into yours. I did as well. I sent Faith's Journey out to a couple of agents and a couple different publishers that would accept simultaneous submissions. But the publisher I'm with came back with, yes, I want it, so I hadn't been struggling for years to get it out. I didn't have a pile of rejection slips. I had a few because,
Yes.
I sent them all out at the same time, but it wasn't that hard, arduous journey that you hear about sometimes.
Now, I did have a pile of rejection notes for my children's book that I tried to publish several years before I even wrote this book. But, I did have one agent that was like, send me the full thing, and then I did, and then they passed. But, so I had a few, but it was for something completely different, which is, picture books are hard to get into anyway. So
I do have several rejection letters, but it's not actually I only had one for that one. But I have a couple of manuscripts that I wrote before that one that I sent out, and looking back, I'm like,
I know,
well, no wonder that they
when
rejected them. Those were so bad.
When I go back and look at my emails I sent out from the picture book, I'm like,
I would have rejected that too.
Yeah.
What was I thinking? So.
I have one that I finished that was a devotional for kids, probably most 10 to 12, but like an 8-year-old would enjoy it, and even younger if the parents were helping them with it or whatever, and could go a little older than that, but it was nature related, which automatically turns it, even though it shouldn't. most people look at it more like, oh, it's nature and animals and things, so it's boys, which is not true, not, you
Right.
know, girls like nature too, and everything. And I pitched it at a conference years ago, and I got some really great feedback. I knew when I pitched it to this person, they weren't going to want it because that's not what they published. But I also found it was really hard in the conferences to find people that weren't children's books or older youth and adults. That
They don't have that
8
mid-range.
to 12 group, they don't want picture books.
Yeah.
But they're not ready for necessarily, I mean, an 8-year-old would probably, if they read your books, would get enjoyment, but they're not meant for that age group.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really hard. So I knew sitting down he wasn't going to be interested in it. But he was at least able to give me good feedback about each devotion, and he liked it. And I also had pitched it to a couple different publishers and things, and I've got those rejection slips, and one of them told me that, oh yeah, I've had it on my desk, we've been, you know, considering it, and it's gone through several rounds of consideration, and if you had pitched it to us X many years ago, we probably would have picked it up, but because the publishing world has changed so much, the audience is going to be too narrow for it to be financially.
Well, at least you got that honest
Yeah.
feedback.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you don't get anything. It's just a no, sorry.
The only reason
You
I
know?
did was because I had not heard anything. I sent the self-addressed stamped envelope, you know, everything it said that if you have this, and I waited well beyond the date. I'm not going to encourage people to go
Right.
contacting publishers and
Right.
agents they've sent things to. But I waited until well beyond the date, and I actually called, and that's when they actually spoke with me and talked to me about it, which was, it was encouraging and discouraging at the same time. It was like, okay, so it's good, but no.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know?
It's hard. There's so many books coming out every year now. It's hard to find a place for something, even if yours is just different enough from everything else. It's a crazy, it's a good thing, but it's also makes it a little harder.
Yeah.
Well, we want to hear if you have gotten any rejection letters, or if you know of a story, we'd love to hear it. Leave us a comment. Be sure to click and subscribe to our videos so you don't miss any of us. And send us your UN20 videos. If you've read something amazing, send us a short little clip telling us about it, and you might appear at the end of our next video. And until the next time, bye.
Bye.